Hello and welcome to the next edition of the Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on business digital transformation. Stay with us now to learn how agile companies are fending off disruption in favor of innovation. Our next case study explores how data analysis services startup BlueLabs in Washington, D.C. helps presidential campaigns better know and engage with potential voters. We'll learn how BlueLabs relies on analytics platforms that allow a democratization of querying, of opening the value of vast big data resources to more of those in the need to know. In this example of helping organizations work smarter by leveraging innovative statistical methods and technology, we'll discover how specific types of voters can be identified and reached. Here to describe how big data is being used creatively by contemporary political organizations for two-way voter engagement, we're joined by Eric Discant. He's the co-founder and vice president of Impact at BlueLabs Analytics in Washington. Welcome, Eric.
So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're very delighted to have you. Obviously, this is a busy season for the analytics people that are focused on politics and campaigns. What are some of the trends that are different in 2016 from just, say, 4 years ago? There's a fast-changing technology set. It's also a fast-changing methodology. And, of course, the trends about how voters think and react and use social and engage are also dynamic. So what's different this cycle?
So from a voter engagement perspective, moving back to 2012, we could reach most of our voters online through a relatively small set of social media channels, through Facebook, through Twitter, a little bit on the Instagram side. Moving into 2016, we see a fragmentation of the online and offline media consumption landscape, and much more folks moving towards purpose-built social media platforms. So if I'm at the HP conference and I want my colleagues back in DC to see what I'm seeing, then maybe I'll use Periscope. Maybe Facebook Live, but maybe Periscope. If I see something that I think, one of my friends will think is really funny, I'll send that to them on Snapchat. What that means is that where political campaigns have traditionally broadcasted messages out through the sort of newsfeed style social media strategies, now we need to consider how it is that one-to-one social media is acting as a force multiplier for our events and for the ideas of our candidates filtered through our campaign's champions.
So perhaps a way to look at that is you're no longer focused on precincts physically, and you're no longer able to use broadcast through social media. It's much more of a influence within communities and identifying those communities in a new way through these apps, perhaps more than platforms.
That's exactly right. And it looks a lot like the way that Democratic campaigns have always organized voters at the door and on the phone. Just now we think of one more way that if you want to be a champion for a candidate, you can be a champion by knocking on doors for us, by making phone calls through online platforms. You can also use one-to-one social media channels to let your friends know why the election matters so much to you and why they should turn out and vote or vote for the issues that really matter to you.
So it's interesting. We're talking about retail campaigning, but it's a bit more virtual. What's interesting, though, is you can get a lot more data through the interaction than you might if you were physically knocking on someone's door.
So I think that the data is different, and what we're starting to see is a shift from demographic targeting. So going back to the year 2000, we were targeting on precincts. Going a little bit later than that, we were targeting on combinations of demographics, on soccer moms, on single women, on single men, on rural, urban, suburban communities separately. Moving to 2012, we looked at everything that we knew about a person and build individual level predictive models so that we knew each person's individual set of characteristics made that person more or less likely to be someone that our candidate that would have an engaging conversation with a volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what we're starting to see is behavioral characteristics trumping demographic or even sort of consumer data. So you can target based on, you can put whiskey drinkers in your model, you can put cat owners in your model, but isn't it a lot more interesting to put in your model, this person has an online profile on our website and this is their clickstream? Isn't it much more interesting to put in a model, this person is likely to consume media via TV. This person's likely to be a cord cutter. This person's likely to be a social media trendsetter. This person's likely to view multiple channels, to use both Facebook and also to consume media on TV. What that lets us do is it lets us have reach a really broad set of interested voters, rather than just creating an echo chamber where we're talking to the same voters across different platforms.
So over time, the analytics tools have gone from semi-blunt instruments to much more precise, and you're also able to then, therefore, better target what you think would be the right voter for you to get the right message out to. Great. So one of the things you mentioned, though, that struck me is the word predictive. I think of campaigning as looking to influence people, and that polling then tries to predict what will happen as a result. Is there somewhat of a less daylight between these two than I'm thinking, that being predictive and campaigning are much more closely associated, and how would that work?
So when I think of predictive modeling, what I think of is predicting something that the campaign doesn't know. So that may be something that'll happen in the future. It may be something that already exists today, but that we don't have an observation for. In the case of the role of polling, what I really see that about is understanding what issues matter the most to voters, and how it is that we can craft messages that resonate with those issues. When I think of predictive analytics, I think of how is it that we allocate our resources to persuade and activate voters. Over the course of elections, what we've seen is an exponential trajectory of the amount of data that is considered by predictive models. But even more important than that is an exponential set of the use cases of models. So sort of today we see every time a predictive model is used, it's used in 1,000,001 ways, whereas, in 2012, it might have been used towards 50 or 20 or 100 key decisions about each voter contact.
Well, it's a fascinating use case to see how analytics and data can be brought to bear on the democratic process, and to help you get messages out probably in a way that's better received by the voter or the prospective voter. Like in a retail or commercial environment, you don't want to hear things that aren't relevant to you. And when people do make an effort to provide you with information that is useful or that helps you make a decision, you benefit and you respect and even admire and enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that what I really want is for the voter experience to be as transparent and easy as possible. That campaigns reach out to me around the same time that I'm seeking information about who I'm going to vote for in November. I know who I'm voting for in 2016, but even some local elections, I may not have made that decision yet. So I want sort of a steady stream of information to be reaching voters as they're in those key decision points with messaging that really is relevant to their lives. And then also, I want to listen to what voters tell me. If a voter has a conversation with a volunteer at the door, that should inform future communications. if somebody's told me, that they're definitely, if somebody's told me that they're definitely voting for the candidate, then, the next conversation should be different from someone who says, hey, I work in energy. I really want to know more about the secretary's energy policies.
Sure, just as if a salesperson is engaging with a process and they use CRM and that data is captured and analyzed and shared, that becomes a much better process for both the buyer and the seller. Same thing in a campaign, right? The better information you have, the more likely you are going to be able to serve that user, that voter.
I think there definitely are parallels to marketing, and that's how we as BlueLabs decided to found the company and work across industries. So we work with Fortune 100 retail organizations that are interested in how it is that once someone buys one item, how we can bring them back into the store to buy the follow-on item, or maybe to buy the follow-on item through that same store's online portal. How it is that we can provide relevant messaging as users engage in complex processes online. All those things are driven from our lessons in politics. Politics is fundamentally different from retail, though, that it's a civic decision rather than an individual level decision. So I always want to be mindful that that I have a duty to voters to provide extremely relevant information to them so that they can be engaged in the civic decision that they need to make.
Yeah. Suffice to say that good quality comparison shopping is still good quality comparison decision making.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Okay, but now that we've established how really relevant, important, and powerful this type of analysis can be in the context of the 2016 campaign, I'd like to learn more about how you go about getting that analysis and making it relevant, speedy, across a large variety of data sets and content sets and so forth. But first, let's hear more about BlueLabs. Tell me about your company, how it started, why you started it, and maybe a little bit about yourself as well.
So the four of us who started BlueLabs met. Some of us met in the 2008 election. Some of us met during the 2010 midterms working at DNC. Throughout that pre-2012 experience, we had the opportunity as practitioners to try a lot of things. Sometimes just once or twice. Sometimes things that we operationalized within those cycles. Jumping forward to 2012, we had the opportunity to scale all that R&D, to say, hey, we did this one thing that was kind of a different way of building models, and it worked in this congressional race. Let's make this 3 people's full-time jobs. Let's scale that up. So then moving past 2012, where we got to build potentially one of the fastest growing startups, one of the most data-driven organizations, we knew that we built a special team. We wanted to continue working together with ourselves and the folks who we worked with and made all this possible. We also wanted to apply the same types of techniques to other areas of social impact and other areas of commerce. This individual level approach to identifying conversations is something that we found unique in the marketplace. We wanted to riff and expand on that. Increasingly, what we're working on is this segmentation of media problem. So this idea that some people watch only TV, you can't ignore TV, it has lots of eyeballs. Some people watch only digital, some people consume a mix of media. How is it that you can build media plans that are aware of people's cross-channel media preferences and reach the right audience with their preferred means of communications?
So that's fascinating. You start with the rigors and demands of a political campaign, but then you can apply it in so many ways, answering the types of questions, anticipating the type of questions that more verticals, more sectors, charitable organizations, of course, too, would want to be involved with. So that's very cool. All right, let's go back to the data science. You've got this vast pool of data. You've got a snappy analytics platform to work with. But one of the things that I'm interested in is how you get more people, whether it's in your organization or a campaign like the Hillary Clinton campaign or the Democratic National Committee, to then be able to utilize that data to get to these inferences, get to these insights that you want. What is it that you look for, and what is it you've been able to do in that form of getting more people able to query, able to utilize the data?
Yeah. So my general belief is that data science happens when individuals have direct access to ask complex questions of a large but gnarly but well-integrated data set. So if I have, let's say, 30 terabytes of data across online contacts, offline contacts, let's say maybe a sample of clickstream data, and I want to ask things like, of the people who went to my online platform and clicked the password reset because they couldn't remember their password, then never followed up with an email, how many of them showed up at a retail location within the next 5 days? Because they tried to engage online, it didn't work out for them. I want to know, are we losing them or are they showing up in person? That type of question, maybe that would make it into a BI report, a few months from then if it turns out to be successful. But it's the type of question that people who are thinking about what we do every day and translating that, I wonder about this, into a query, then, standing up and saying, I think I found something. I think I found a way that, that we can, that if we give these folks phone calls who lost their password, maybe we can reset their passwords over the phone, re-engage those folks. Just one tiny micro example, which is why data science is truly a human-intensive exercise. You get 50, 100 people working at an enterprise solving problems like that, and what you ultimately get is a positive feedback loop of self-correcting systems. That every time that there's a problem, there's somebody thinking about how is that problem represented in the data? How do I quantify that? If it's significant enough, then how is it that the organization can improve in this one specific area? Mm-hmm. So that all can be done with business logic is the interesting piece. Mm. You need very granular data that's accessible via querying. You need reasonably fast query times because you can't ask questions like that when you're going to get coffee every time you run a query. Mm. Then what layering predictive modeling allows you to do is it allows you to understand the opportunity for impact if you fix that problem. Mm-hmm. So say that that one hypothesis with those users who can't reset their passwords is maybe those users aren't that engaged in the first place. So okay, you've fixed their password, but it doesn't move the needle. Mm-hmm. The other hypothesis is that it's people who are actively trying to engage with your service and unsuccessful because of this one very specific barrier. Mm-hmm. If you have a model of user engagement at an individual level, you can say, hey, these are really high-value users that are having this problem, or maybe they aren't. Mm. So you take data science, align it with really smart individual-level business analysis. What you get is an organization that continues to improve without it having to happen at an executive decision level for each one of those things. Mm.
So a great deal of inquiry, experimentation, iterative improvement, feedback loops can all come together very powerfully. And I'm all for the data scientist full employment movement. But we need to do more than have people have to go through data scientists to use and access and develop these feedback insights. So what is it about SQL or language or natural language APIs? What is it that you like to see that allows for more people to be able to directly relate and engage with these powerful data sets?
So one of the things is the product management of data schemas. So whenever we build a analytics database for a large-scale organization, I think a lot about what can an analyst who's 22, knows VLOOKUP, took some statistics classes in college, has some personal stories about the industry that they're working in, so they know, hey, my grandmother is not a native English speaker. This is how she'd use this website. So taking that hypothesis that's driven from personal stories, then being able to through a relatively simple query translate that into a database query, find out if that hypothesis proves true at scale. Potentially take the results of that query, dump them into a statistical analysis language, or use in database analytics to answer that in a more robust way. What that means is that our schemas favor very, very wide schemas, because I want someone to be able to write a 3-line SQL statement, no joins, that answers a business question that I wouldn't have thought to put in a report. So that's the first line, is analyst-friendly schemas that are accessed via SQL or Tableau. Then the next line is deep KPIs. So once we step out of the analytics database consumers, drop into the wider organization that's consuming data at a different level, I always want reporting to report on opportunity for impact, to report on, are we reaching our most valuable customers, not how many customers are we reaching. Because are we reaching our most valuable customers is much more easily addressable. You just talk to different people. Whereas are we reaching enough customers? I don't know how to make. I can go over to the sales team and yell at them to work harder. But ultimately, I want our reporting to facilitate smarter workings, which means incorporating model scores and predictive analytics into our KPIs.
All right, great. Let's step back from the edge of where we engage the analyst to the core, where we need to provide the ability for them to do what they want, and which gets them those great results. It seems to me that when you're dealing in a campaign cycle, that this is very spiky. You have a short period of time where there's a tremendous need for a tremendous amount of data, but that could quickly go down between cycles of an election, or in a retail environment leading up to a holiday season, for example, could be very intensive. Do you therefore take advantage of the cloud models for your analytics that make a fit-for-purpose approach to data and analytics, pay as you go? Tell us a little bit about your strategy for the data and the analytics engine.
So all our customers have a cyclical nature to them. I think that actually almost every business is cyclical, just some more than others. What that means is that horizontal scaling is incredibly important to us. It would be very difficult for us to do what we do without using a cloud model such as AWS. Also, one of the things that works well for us with Vertica is the licensing model, that we can add additional performance with only the cost of hardware or hardware provision through the cloud. That allows us to scale up our clusters during the busy season, and we'll sometimes even scale them back down during slower periods, so that we can have those 150 analysts asking their own questions about the areas of the program that they're responsible for during busy cycles, and then during less busy cycles, scale down the footprint of the operation.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else about the HPE Vertica on-demand platform that benefits your particular way and need for analysis? I'm thinking about the scale and the rows. You must have so many variables when it comes to, let's say, in a retail situation, a commercial situation, where you're trying to really understand that consumer.
I do everything I can to avoid aggregation. I want my analysts to be looking at the data at the interaction by interaction level. If it's a website, I want them to be looking at clickstream data. If it's a retail organization, I want them to be looking at point of sale data. In order to do that, we build data sets that are, very frequently in the billions of rows. They're also very frequently incredibly wide, because we don't just want to know every transaction and with this dollar amount. We want to know things like what were the census variables, where that store was located. Getting back to the idea that we want our queries to be dead simple. That means that we'll very frequently just append additional columns onto our transactional tables. We're okay that the tables get big because in a columnar model, we can pick out just the columns that we want for that particular query. Right. Then moving into some of the in-database machine learning algorithms, that allows us to perform more higher order computation within the database and have less data shipping.
Well, great. We're almost out of time, but I wanted to do some predictive analysis ourselves, thinking about the next election cycle, midterms, only 2 years away. What might change between now and then? And because we hear so much about machine learning and bots and advanced algorithms, how do you predict, Eric, the way that big data will come and bear on the next election cycle?
I think that a big piece of the next election will be around moving even more away from demographic targeting, demographic inputs to models, more towards even more behavioral targeting. How is it that we reach every voter based on what they're telling us about them and what matters to them, how that matters to them? Then that will increasingly drive our models. To do that, it involves, probably another 10x scale in the data, because that type of data is generally at the clickstream level, generally at the interaction by interaction level. Incorporating things like Twitter feeds adds an additional level of complexity and length and computational necessity to the data.
It almost sounds like you're shooting for sentiment analysis on an issue-by-issue basis. Very complex undertaking, but could be very powerful.
I think that it's heading in that direction, yes.
Well, very good. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how data analysis services startup BlueLabs in Washington helps presidential campaigns better know and engage with potential voters. And we've learned how organizations are working smarter by leveraging innovative statistical methods and technologies, and in this case, looking at two-way voter engagement in entirely new ways in this and in future election cycles. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Eric Discont. He's the co-founder and vice president of Impact at BlueLabs in Washington. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
And a big thank you as well to our audience for joining us for this Hewlett-Packard Enterprise Voice of the Customer Digital Transformation discussion. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of HPE-sponsored interviews. Thanks again for listening, and please come back next time.